Hello, this is Ben Television News Roundup, a compilation of major stories in the weekend. I am today Alabi. Thank you for being part of the program today. Prime Minister Theresa May has used her address at the 73rd session of the United Nations General Assembly meeting in New York to advance the need for the world to build a stronger global economy and open society that is inclusive of all and uphold the international rule-based system. She said world leaders should rise up to protect victims of rights violation while criticizing Russia for violation of international law and the Salisbury attack.
So those of us who believe in inclusive societies and open economies have a duty to respond, to learn the lessons of the past, to meet people's concerns with practical actions, not beguiling illusions, and to renew our confidence in the ideas and values that have done so much to benefit so many for so long. For be in no doubt, if we lack the confidence to step up, others will. In the last century, whether in the rise of fascism or the spread of communism, we have seen those on the extreme right and extreme left exploit people's fears, stoke intolerance and racism, close down economies and societies, and destroy the peace of nations. And today, once more, we see worrying trends in the rise of these movements in Europe and beyond. We have seen what happens when countries slide into authoritarianism, slowly crushing the basic freedoms and rights of their citizens. We have seen what happens when corrupt oligarchies rob their nations of the wealth, resources, and human capital that are so vital to unlocking a brighter future for their citizens. We have seen what happens when the natural patriotism, which is a cornerstone of a healthy society, is warped into aggressive nationalism, exploiting fear and uncertainty to promote identity politics at home and belligerent confrontation abroad, while breaking rules and undermining institutions. And we see this when states like Russia flagrantly breach international norms, from the seizing of sovereign territory to the reckless use of chemical weapons on the streets of Britain by agents of the Russian GRU. We have to show there is a better way to meet the concerns of our people. That way lies in global cooperation between strong and accountable states based on open economies and inclusive societies. That ensures strong nation states provide the bonds that bring citizens together and ensures power remains accountable to those it is there to serve. That celebrates free markets and has the confidence to reform them when they need to work better. And that demonstrates that delivering for your citizens at home does not have to be at the expense of global cooperation and the values, rules, and ideals that underpin this. Indeed, cooperation and competition are not mutually exclusive. Only global cooperation based on a set of agreed rules can ensure competition is fair and does not succumb to protectionism, with its certain path to lost jobs and international confrontation. And it is only global cooperation which can harness legitimate self-interest towards common goals, producing agreements on global challenges such as climate change, proliferation, and increasing inclusive economic growth. We see this cooperation here today at this UN, as we also saw it at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting earlier this year. And here today, as Chair in Office of the Commonwealth, I deliver a clear statement on behalf of the Heads of Government of its 53 equal and independent member states. We reaffirm our shared commitment to work together within a rules-based international system to address shared global challenges and foster a fairer, more secure, more sustainable, and more prosperous future. This commitment takes account of the special requirements of least developed countries and of small and otherwise vulnerable economies, and it benefits all our citizens and the wider world. But it is not enough for us merely to make the case for cooperation. We need action at home and in the community of nations to show how our ideas and values can deliver practical benefits for all our people in all parts of the world. We must recognize the legitimacy of people's concerns and act to build a global economy that works for everyone. We must invest in the patient work of building open societies in which everyone has a stake in the future. and we must act to uphold the international rules-based system and stand up for our values by protecting those who may suffer when it is violated. Let me take each in turn. First, we must respond to those who feel that the global economy is not working for them. The pace of globalization that has left too many people behind. The fear that our children and grandchildren may lack the education and skills to secure the jobs of tomorrow. And the risk that technological change could become a source of inequality and division rather than the greatest opportunity in history. In the UK, we are driving investment in industries of the future to create new jobs, from low-carbon technologies to artificial intelligence. We are investing in education and skills so that workers are ready to make the most of the opportunities that lie ahead. And we are making sure people...
However, in his own address at the United Nations General Assembly meeting, U.S. President Donald Trump has rejected the idea of globalism in favor of national patriotism and American first foreign policy idea. He called on member nations to defend themselves against global governance.
As world leaders sat in the audience, a declaration from the world's most powerful nation.
We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism. Around the world, responsible nations must defend against threats to sovereignty, not just from global governments, but also from other new forms of coercion and domination.
President Donald Trump's speech to the UN General Assembly outlined his policy of sovereignty and patriotism. He mentioned a number of UN institutions that Washington has left or boycotted since he came to power, including the Human Rights Council and the Global Compact on Migration. His address stood in contrast to the UN Secretary General's call to strengthen the world body.
Individual leaders have the duty to advance the well-being of their people, but it runs deeper. Together, as guardians of the common good, we also have a duty to promote and support a reformed, reinvigorated and strengthened multilateral system.
Trump's second UNGA speech continued the America First theme that he presented to this international forum last year, which marked a major shift from President Obama's foreign policy.
Binding ourselves to international rules over the long term enhances our security. And I think that's not just true for us.
Trump has pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Paris Climate Accord, and the Iran nuclear deal. He has threatened to leave the World Trade Organization, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Charles Kupchan from the Foreign on Council Relations sees Trump's policies as promoting a post-American, post-Western world order.
He wants to go back to a world of hard, sovereign, self-interested states. He wants this to be a world of America first, Germany first, China first, Japan first, everybody out there doing their own thing. And that's a dramatic shift, because starting with Pearl Harbor and running through President Obama, we were very much about seeing our interests as intermingled with the interests of like-minded states, not running counter to them.
The U.S. representative at the UN, Nikki Haley, explained the U.S. still wants to be involved in multilateral organizations.
But not in the way that they're mandated on what the United States does or that infringes on the American people.
Trump has often accused countries and even alliances like NATO of taking advantage of the United States. And his supporters see Trump's rejection of multilateralism as keeping his campaign promise of making America great again.
Also, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has called for global action against corruption. Speaking at the 73rd session of the United Nations General Assembly meeting in New York, President Buhari said corruption and illicit flow of funds across the world are responsible for the lack of growth and development in developing nations. The president calls for repatriation of all illicit funds kept in different countries to their countries of origin.
Corruption within countries and illicit flow of funds across national boundaries have huge negative impact on the stability, peace and economic prospect of millions in developing countries. Corruption significantly robs national governments of resources to provide meaningful livelihoods to their populations, who are predominantly youth, thus giving rise to more irregular migration. The fight against corruption, therefore, involves us all. It is in our collective interest to cooperate in tracking illicit financial flows, investigate and prosecute corrupt individuals and entities, and repatriate such funds to their countries of origin. Fighting corruption or resolving international conflicts, crises, and wars, defeating terrorism and piracy, curbing arms trafficking, and the proliferation of small arms and light weapons, which fuel these conflicts, particularly in Africa, stemming irregular migration by addressing its root causes, and the many of other global challenges we are faced with today can only be effectively addressed through multilateral cooperation and concerted action. The only global institutional framework we have to address these challenges is the United Nations system. That is why we continue to call for the strengthening of the organization and making it more effective by speeding up the pace of progress towards its reform, including that of its principal organ, the Security Council. The reconstitution of the Council to make it more equitable and more representative of our global community is both a political and moral imperative. We believe that a reformed Security Council with expanded membership in both the permanent and non-permanent categories is in accord with prevailing international consensus, and it is in our collective interest to do so. It is high time we stop skirting around the issue and establish achievable benchmarks and time frames for these reforms. I assure you all that in this advocacy, I am only reflecting Nigeria's deep and abiding commitment to our organization and its founding principles and goals. From the date we joined in 1960, we have contributed our quota to the fulfillment of the mandate of the United Nations. We have been active participants in many Security Council and African Union authorized peacekeeping operations around the world, beginning with the Democratic Republic of the Congo in 1960. Furthermore, Nigeria has always mobilized the required human and material resources to achieve set United Nations goals, including the recently adopted 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We are resolute in complementing the efforts and example of the United Nations to promote gender equality and youth empowerment as necessary pillars for sustainable development.
Also speaking at the General Assembly meeting, Zimbabwe President Emmerson Mnangagwa has assured the international community of his country's commitment to democratic values, rule of law, peace, and unity. He disclosed these while addressing the 73rd United Nations General Assembly meeting in New York.
In view of the fact that elections are an integral element of democracy, my country held the much anticipated harmonized general elections on the 30th of July 2018. Following my deliberate and conscious decision to open up the democratic space and emphatic call for peace, unity, and tolerance of divergent views among our people, political contestations, election campaigning, voting and counting processes were conducted freely, peacefully, and transparently. In the spirit of transparency and openness, a broader spectrum of international observers and the global media houses were accredited to observe our elections. The exceptionally peaceful pre- and post-electoral environment represented the maturing and entrenchment of democracy in Zimbabwe. We are grateful to the United Nations and other member states for sending election observer missions and for the technical assistance received by our election management body. The recommendations will be taken into account as we deepen our democratic and electoral processes. We shall continue to entrench constitutionalism, democratic traditions and norms, peace, unity, and harmony, for it is indeed under such conditions that sustainable development, inclusive economic growth, and prosperity can occur. The isolated and unfortunate incident of the post-election violence that occurred on 1st August 2018 is regrettable and most unacceptable. The Commission of Inquiry, comprising eminent persons of national, regional, and international repute, has now begun its work in earnest. Their ultimate report and recommendations shall help us bring closure to the matter and assist in the improvement of our institutional governance.
And more than 1,000 women in northeastern Nigerian state of Borno are urging the government to free their husbands and sons who have been detained for years on suspicion of being members of extremist group Boko Haram.
Not knowing where your children are is every parent's worst nightmare. Bintu's 2 sons have been gone for 5 years now. Sitting in their bedroom, she's overwhelmed with grief. Dunoma and Abuna were high school students when soldiers arrested them in 2013 on suspicion of having links to the extremist group Boko Haram.
One night, soldiers came around 3 a.m., hitting our door and shouting, "Where are the boys? Where are the boys? Bring out your sons."
Her other children have been growing up for years without their 2 older brothers. Local activist Hamsatu Alamin has been hearing stories similar to Bintu's of women whose husbands and sons have been detained for years. So she's created a network to help them.
This network is to seek accountability for the whereabouts of these children. As you can see the environment, this is how all members of my network are. Poor, wretched people, no voices. They don't even know where to go and start asking.
More than 1,000 women have now come together. In this refugee camp, they share their stories. And they're active. Earlier this year, they wrote an open letter to President Muhammadu Buhari, begging to be reunited with their sons and husbands, whom they say have no ties to Boko Haram. Some of them could be caught up in Nigeria's notoriously slow legal system. This month, Human Rights Watch denounced the trials of Boko Haram suspects as flawed by legal shortcomings. While the case seen here is not Boko Haram related, this court has handled the largest number of such cases in the region.
When you go through it, you realize that definitely they have a reason. They have reasons to be brought here. But then this is always common, not here in Nigeria, everywhere. People talk of abuse of human rights. It is not the courts that are at fault.
The people whose families have been torn apart by the Boko Haram insurgency don't know who is at fault. But occasionally, something special happens. This mother hasn't seen her son since he was arrested years ago on suspicion of being a Boko Haram member. He's now been cleared and released from detention. Their reunion draws attention. For Bintu, she still awaits her own reunion. Forever hopeful, she goes through their old school papers as a way to keep her memory of them alive.
With that report, we conclude the news roundup for this week. Thank you for being part of the program. I am Tunde Alabi. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye. Regardless resident status abroad, living outside the shores of one's homeland can really be challenging and sometimes very difficult. Let's be sincere, to keep pace with happenings from the host country abroad can really be difficult. Here on Dialogue in Diaspora, we give you every information, every news, every current issue you need to know on happenings outside the UK. Dialogue in Diaspora is your link between the world and the United Kingdom. It's your window to Africa development. Here, live on Ben Television.